All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Fewer in number this morning, but we usually accumulate
There's
some
a
people.
trickle.
Yes, we accumulate people as they come. So
Finding their way in.
yes, I feel like I'm still trying to get back in the swing of things. I just got back in town on Wednesday night from being at the Tikkun conference in Maryland, and then I went and spent a couple days in West Virginia just to enjoy being in a pretty place. So that was fun.
And you got elected to teach, didn't you?
Yeah,
Or you volunteered?
well,
The rotation.
kind of both.
Yeah, rotation.
I agreed. I was on the schedule with a question mark, and I just was like, yeah, I mean, typically where they put me in is where no one else is available. So,
Yeah.
so you're stuck with me today, but
We like you, Emma.
well, thanks. I like you too, Christina.
Lisa.
So, but this portion, I do find this portion very easy to talk about because it's a hard one. This is one of the portions that's why I say Numbers sometimes is harder than Leviticus. But it's interesting, and there's always some things that I really feel like every year when I come around to this portion, there's some things the Lord reminds me of. So some of what we talk about today we've maybe talked about in past years, but I figure that's okay. We need the reminder sometimes, and not everybody would have been here last year. So this is of course like this. Most people are fairly familiar with this story when the scouts go and check out the land and come back to Moses and with their report and all that brings. So I do kind of just want to work our way through some of this and talk about like what the Lord actually instructed them to do, and then what they did and how that plays out. So we start off at the beginning of chapter 13. So I'll probably read several sections as we go along just to keep us all kind of together here. But we start off with Adonai giving instructions to Moses. So it says, Adonai spoke to Moses saying, "Send some men on your behalf to investigate the land of Canaan, which I am giving to Bnei Israel. Each man you are to send will be a prince of the tribe of his fathers, a man from each tribe." So then it goes through and all the people that are chosen from each tribe. So that's how we come up with who all the spies are going to be. So these are kind of prominent people within the tribes, which is interesting. And then we go on, and Moses is giving them instruction. I'm going to jump down to verse 16. These are the names of the men Moses sent to investigate the land. Now he gave Hoshea, son of Nun, the name Joshua. As he sent them to explore the land of Canaan, he said to them, "Go up there through the Negev and go up into the hill country. See what the land is like and the people living there, whether they might be strong or weak, few or many. In what kind of land are they living? Is it good or bad? Also, what about the cities in which they are living? Are they unwalled or do they have fortifications? How is the soil, fertile or poor? Are there trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land," because it was the season for the first ripe grapes. So this sounds like good things to find out, right? It sounds like these are all the things. If this is the land you're going to be going into, it sounds like it's good to know what you're going into, right? So he's basically like, just go check it out. See what the people are like, see what the land is like, see what the trees are like, see what the conditions are like. And it starts out seeming like it's going to be okay. So they go, and they bring some branches. They bring a branch of grapes back, right? Pomegranates, figs, because there's really great produce in the land. We know that Israel grows some really wonderful produce. So they do bring some of that back. So it seems like this is going well. They're following instructions. However, then they come back and we get their report. So I'm going to read that section. So I'm going to jump into verse 26. So they traveled and returned to Moses, Aaron, and the entire community of Bnei Israel at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. They gave their report to them and the entire assembly. They showed the land's fruit. They gave their account to him and said, "We went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey. This is some of its fruit. Except the people living in the land are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the sons of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites are living in the mountains, and the Canaanites are living near the sea and along the bank of the Jordan." Okay, so let's stop there for a second. So remember, the instruction was go and see what the people were like, what the cities were like, what the land is like. So that's really what they're reporting right now. They're starting to hint that they're not thinking that this is a great situation because they're talking about how powerful these people are, which is okay. But so far, they haven't dug themselves quite in such a deep hole yet. But then verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should definitely go up and capture the land first, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, we cannot attack these people because they are stronger than we. They spread among Bnei Israel a bad report about the land which they had explored, saying, "The land through which we passed to explore devours its residents. All the people we saw are men of great size. We also saw there the Nephilim, the sons of Anak are from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our eyes as well as theirs." Okay, so they're saying there's no way, right? Caleb is saying, of course we can do this. Everyone else is like, there's not a chance. What's the problem with this? Did the Lord and Moses, speaking on behalf of the Lord, did he ask them to determine if they could do it or not? So, this is a problem, right? So, and they're starting to spread this report through all the people. And we know that they are influential, right? These are like leaders in their tribes. Mm-hmm. So like these are people, like they intentionally sent people that the rest of the people are going to listen to, right? You don't send the leaders if you don't expect them to have influence, right? But I remember reading through this a couple years ago and it stuck out, and I'm like, he didn't tell them to evaluate whether they could do this or not. He just told them to go gather information, right? Mm-hmm. Because the Lord already knew what was there, right? He's not surprised by the situation. But he's bringing them in, and again, like I look at the Torah, one of the lenses I use when I read through the Torah, especially the Exodus and the wilderness narratives, is looking at this like relationship building between the Lord and his people, because they've been enslaved, right? And we're going to get into how their slavery mindset plays into what's happening, like in the next passage. But so the Lord is kind of in this process of like undoing that slavery mindset and building this relationship and showing himself in a lot of ways as a father. But he's building trust with them. Like when we are back, like when they first come out of Egypt and they're like, we don't have any food or water. It's like, that's valid. These are valid complaints, right? And the Lord provides that for them. And he's continuing to miraculously provide food and water for them through the whole wilderness narrative. And he's done all of these miracles so far. We've had Sinai, we've had all these things happen for God to show his faithfulness to the people, right? And to show his power. Like these are the same people who saw the entire army of the Egyptians be drowned, right, in the Nile. So going into a land where there are powerful people shouldn't really seem like that's outside of his capability, right? But they're seeing, and it's like even just the very last line of this section, we seem like grasshoppers in our eyes as well as theirs. So their perception is that they're big and we're not, and we can all see that. But that's not, and that's true. Right? Like there's nothing that they said that's not true. But the problem is that they are being asked to, which is a stretch, like which faith is always a stretch, right? They're kind of being asked to see what's in front of them and then trust that the Lord is powerful enough to overcome that. Because he's already promised them the land. He's promised that he's going to take them into the land. So the tension then is like, is he been powerful and faithful enough to take them into the land, even though it seems impossible, right? Anything else in this first chapter jump out, or comments on any of that before we move on?
I think what stands out to me is that they're comparing themselves to other men.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a comparison factor. So like if I start comparing myself to anybody, it's never gonna be enough. It's never gonna look
Right.
good.
Right.
Whereas if I keep my focus on what the Lord has told me, what He's promised, then that's a whole different story.
Right.
So then I can look at what is in the land and get excited about it, as opposed to be afraid. So the comparison piece is the one that stands out.
Yeah, that's good.
It also is striking that Caleb and the other men had such a different view of what they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of, it really speaks to, like, you just wonder, was Caleb really hanging on to the words of the Lord? And because he was hanging on to the words of the Lord, just about the land, and the promise of the land, that he looked at it and he saw the same things that the other men saw, but he came away from it like with a positive outlook,
right.
like, yes, we can do that, as opposed, to maybe the other men who just saw all the obstacles. So it's just kind of curious, does our level of faith and trust in the Lord affect the way that we perceive reality?
Mm-hmm.
Whether we look at it negatively or positively, or
Yeah.
Whether we see the promise or the problem.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say too, because Caleb, the Lord's later going to say he had a different spirit than his men,
Mm-hmm.
and he was looking at that the battle was the Lord's,
Mm-hmm.
not that because they couldn't do it in their own strength. I think he knew the Lord was capable.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like one of those passages I'm like, I wish we had a little bit more insight into Caleb's, like what Caleb was seeing, what he, because we just, so far, I mean, we'll get a little bit more as we go, but, he's so confident. We should definitely go up and capture this land. We can absolutely do this. And so, but that's all we have. And so, I mean, we're speculating that he is standing on the words of the Lord, that he's even just remembering his experiences with the Lord and what he's seen, how the Lord has delivered him. The Lord has a pretty good track record of doing what he says and coming through when he's needed. And so it seems like Caleb is remembering that, and everyone else is not. That's kind of the conclusion we draw. That's where I see it too. The other thing is that's interesting is like when they initially give their report before Caleb speaks, it says that they're powerful and their cities are fortified. But at that point they hadn't really been like super like, we can't do this. They were just like, there's some serious things going on, But then Caleb speaks, and then all of a sudden they get more extreme. And they start kind of rallying everyone else with this negative report, and they're like, all of a sudden they're like, the land devours its residents. It's like, what does that mean? Like, I mean, it seems like he's talking about the people in the land, not necessarily the land itself, of course. But, because there's all these different groups of people, and we see this continuing to play out, because there's all these different groups of people in the land, there's constantly fighting and wars over territory and over resources and all these things, because that's what happens when you put a lot of different groups of people with different priorities and all wanting power in a very small piece of land. And it's still happening. So some things, it seems like some things never change, but we know the end of the story, so it's gonna be okay. But anyway, so let's move on a little bit into chapter 14. So we start to, because we will start to get some of the consequences of the of what's happening. So the beginning of chapter 14, all through the night the entire community raised up their voices, and the people wept. All Bnei Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole community said, "If only we had died in Egypt. If only we had died in this wilderness. Why is Adonai bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be like plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "Let's choose a leader and let's go back to Egypt." This seems like a really extreme reaction, right? But it goes to show, right, that these people really had a lot of influence, and they got the whole nation to believe that this is impossible. We can't do this. It would be better if we were in Egypt. So, like I said earlier, kind of one of what we're seeing in a lot of these narratives in the wilderness are about the Lord kind of having to shift the mindset of slavery, because it's all they had known for generations, right? And there's some level of, like the known even if it's bad, sometimes the known seems a better option than the unknown. So these people are very human. They're responding in very human ways. And the Lord chooses to work through humans. So it's hard. I mean, these are always these passages. It's so hard for us to look back and be like, how could they think that going back to Egypt is better? But I mean, this is one of the things I feel like comes up to me every year when I read these passages, and I always feel like the Lord is asking me, it's like, what are you just staying in because it's familiar and you understand, you can do it, versus what is he calling me to? And that has come up in different areas of life over the years. And so, and especially when you have, again, like Israel is maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million people at this point. When you have that many people who are all agreeing to that same narrative, it's really hard to be the one with a different one, right? It's really hard to be the Joshua and Caleb in that situation. So it seems like in their minds, this is one thing I was noticing as I was reading through this again yesterday. It seems like in their minds, their options are either go into Israel and be killed, or go back to Egypt. But what's going to happen to them if they go back to Egypt? Are they just going to be like, "Oh, hey, welcome back, guys. Here's your land, here's your property, and here's your old jobs back"? Is that going to happen to them? No, absolutely not. These people overthrew They rebelled. And they escaped.
Slavery rebellion.
Yeah.
Never, looked upon.
Right. So you don't just get to go back.
Yeah.
And they probably know that on some level. But that's what they're lamenting is it'd be better. But that's why they even somehow it makes sense to them to be like, well, let's just choose a different leader and go back. How does that make any sense? It doesn't. So their minds, we have option A and option B, right? But is that really true? The Lord always has some different perspective, right? So I think this next section is really interesting. And I'd like to hear some thoughts about how this, what you think about some of this as we go.
First of all, from where we are, it's I think it's easy for us, it reminds me of words of Jesus. He said, you who killed the prophets, you say that you wouldn't have done that.
Right.
It's easy to look back and cast judgment on other people who were in a certain situation, but you said it yourself, these are humans. Yeah. And, so are we. And so we have a tendency to do exactly the same thing. Right. And we can, it's easy to sit and be an armchair, judge about this. But they're exhibiting human nature. Mm-hmm. And the whole narrative is about faith or not having faith. Right. Right. That's it. And so it's easier, what this teaches us, I think it's easier to not have faith. It's more, we're more prone to that, to go to the familiar, because the alternative is a huge risk. There's a bunch of fear involved. And the application of this is,
Yeah, for sure. Because really, we see this playing out. We see this play out through the rest of Scripture, right? We watch this back and forth happen with Israel throughout all of history. but it is interesting to see like how like because like we said, we watched this grow really quickly, which we don't really have a frame of reference of how much time this took, but because we don't have all the timestamps, but like we watched them very quickly to go from going like, look at this great produce of the land, and there's some big and powerful people there, to being like, we absolutely can't do this, we need to go back to slavery. It's like this escalated quickly. Right? But that happens. But like when you can get people to buy into a narrative, right? And we see this happen all over the place. Still, it's like when you can get enough people to buy into a narrative, even if it's crazy, it starts to make sense to people and they start to follow it, right? Even if they don't really like it doesn't, like reading that, what, we should just go back to Egypt. Like it doesn't make any sense to us, right? Because we know they're going to die. But they're not even thinking about that somehow. Like they bought into this is a better option. But what you said about even later when Yeshua says it, and then I was thinking about this earlier this week when I was thinking about this passage too. Of I love Stephen's speech in Acts 7. I just really love it. I wrote a paper about it at one point because I love it so much. But anyway, but he brings up the same thing at the end of it. Because he basically retells the Torah, which is one of the things I like about it. Is like, I'm like, would be helpful if we all could do this, kind of like he did. If we all had our own like summary teaching of really the whole Tanakh. Well, mostly Torah, I guess. But anyway, but then he goes through and talks about towards the end of it. So this is Acts 7:51. If you're interested, he says, "Oh, you stiff-necked people, you uncircumcised of heart and ears, you always resist the Ruach HaKodesh, just as your fathers did. You do as well. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? They killed the ones who foretold the coming of the righteous one. Now you have become his betrayers and his murderers. You who received the Torah by the direction of angels and did not keep it." So this continues to magnify, right? Like just like what you were saying, it's like the prophets are never received well. Right. And then we go back and read and it's like, of course this makes so much sense. But at the time it's like.
At the time, yeah. When you look at in the New Testament, we read about the disciples, and it's really easy to say, how could they have done that? How could they have reacted that way? How could Peter have denied Yeshua? How could this have happened? I would have done that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which is why I think it's important that we read these, and when we have, this is what I'm still trying to learn this. But like when I have those reactions when I'm reading of like, how could they have done this? Like it like always brings a little bit of conviction, and the Lord will be like, well, let's look at your life, and it like, there's like, he's so kind about it, right? Because he's always like just wanting us to become more like him. So he's always looking like for ways that he can help us reframe our thoughts and our minds. And so for me, those are those opportunities is when I look at this, I'm like, because again, these are humans. Like the Lord writes it. It's one of the ways the Lord is actually really kind is that he writes his story through relationship with humans who are really stupid sometimes, and we're really no better than they are, like hopefully we start to learn from history, but it often takes our own experiences and some of our own trials and failures to actually make that reality. And so that's one of the things I'm trying to learn is when I feel that like, how could they? I like start to like reflect, and it's like, well, are there areas when I'm like, when the Lord, I feel like the Lord is telling me something, but I'm seeing it like this, and I'm having a hard time yielding to what the Lord sees. Like, where are those moments for me? So, those are some of the things I try to take away from things like this. But it's hard. Okay, so they're back. They are thinking they should need to go back to Egypt. And Moses and Aaron know that's a bad plan. So we're back in Numbers 14.
Yeah. Oh, you.
I was going to go on, but you can go ahead.
I'm just impressed at like verse 5 and 6 at like Moses' response and Joshua and Caleb, their humility to like beg the community to change their minds.
Right.
Like they fall to their faces to like beg their own people to be like, no, let's look at what's good.
Yeah. No, I love this. I love this reaction. So we'll just go ahead and.
Okay.
I read it, yeah.
Okay.
Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the entire assembly of the community of Bnei Israel. Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes. They said to the whole assembly of Bnei Israel, "The land through which we passed is an exceptionally good land. If Adonai is pleased with us, he will lead us into the land and will give it to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Only don't rebel against Adonai, and don't be afraid of the people in the land. They will be food for us. The protection over them is gone. Adonai is with us. Do not fear them." But the whole assembly talked about violently stoning them. So, yeah, it's so dramatic, but it's so, I don't know, it just always just hits me. So because what you're saying, Christina, is it's amazing that the righteous, right, these four righteous ones, their response is to fall on their faces, tear their clothes, cry out for their people, and to point to no, listen, the land is good. They basically they understood the assignment, right? Joshua and Caleb understood the assignment when they went in the land. They noticed how good the land was. It's kind of so when we did, I don't remember, a few weeks ago, whenever that was, we did a women's event where we had the security team did some training for us, and they did a practical training, and then they did kind of a classroom session where they were kind of going through just even a lot of what they talked about is being aware of your surroundings. And something that Kenny said at the very end really stuck with me because it's easy when you're talking about, and they're doing some demonstrations of how quickly things can happen, and it can be scary sometimes to be you start to think about, you let your mind go down too far down the path, and you start to think about all these different terrible situations of being attacked or being whatever, all these different things that could happen at any given moment, because there are crazy people in the world. But Kenny, one thing that Kenny said, he's be aware but live your life, right? He's the goal is not, they're not trying to get us to live in this element of fear, right? They're not trying, he was even saying, it's if you get to this point of hypervigilance and you are just convinced that some attack is coming at any moment, it's you need to talk to someone, and we need to work on that. That's not how he wants us to live. He's I want you to be aware of everybody that's around you, but live your life and have fun and enjoy yourself, but be aware, right? And I feel that's kind of what's going on here. Joshua and Caleb saw the same people, and so it's we're aware of the situation in the land, and yet we're going to focus on what's good, and we know that we have the most powerful God on our side. So any protection they think they have is actually not protection at all, because he can win it. So I don't know, for some reason that was kind of the connection I was drawing in my mind. It's be aware, but don't live in fear of it, right?
Because then you're living in fear and not faith.
Right.
So that's where faith enters. Even as a woman, yes, be aware, but I trust that God's protecting me.
Yeah.
And maybe you're going to show me something, or go this way instead of that way, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's living in faith.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's also, and it's just and the Lord is actually asking them to trust, right, in his demonstrated power. It's not he's never done. This is why it's important to keep in mind the whole, and we already mentioned this a little bit, but the whole story, right? It's the same God that led them through Egypt. It's the same God who even sustained them and had them multiply in number in Egypt. The be fruitful and multiply command was really initially starting to be fulfilled while they were in slavery, right? Which is really interesting. And he was with the patriarchs. There's a history, and they know this history. And so it's not that the Lord is even asking them to be to trust in something he's never done for them before. He's asking them to trust in his demonstrated power, which I don't know. Maybe that's just my brain. I tend to sometimes I look at some of these stories in isolation, and then it's no, actually, this is part of a bigger story. Yeah.
Another way of saying that is a scripture that comes to mind. His faithfulness is a shield and a bulwark. So I think that's exactly what we have to do, because he has demonstrated his faithfulness to all of us along the way. So when the next challenge comes, the next giants in the land, drawing on that instead of what we see, what we see as impossible for us.
Yeah. and it's also like the Lord also, like, again, in his desire for relationship and the way that he has chosen to work through and with his people is that, like, it is his power that will ultimately make them able to overcome these people, but he uses the power of the people to do that. And so, like, even like, look, if we look back to what he promises them, the end of Leviticus. Sorry, guys, we can't leave Leviticus for too long. At the end of Leviticus, right, he gives all these blessings and curses, basically, right? And so he, in the blessings, he talks about, this is Leviticus 26:6. He says, I will bring shalom in the land, and you will lie down with no one making you afraid. I will remove dangerous beasts from the land, and no sword will pass through your land. You will chase your enemies, and they will fall before you by the sword. Five of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 10,000, and your enemies will fall by the sword before you. So it's like, so the Lord is the one who makes them powerful, but he uses their power to do it in some sense. Does that make sense? Like, he's using them. Like, they still have to fight, right? Like, they are still going to have to go to battle. But the Lord is going to make them more capable than what they would be on their own. So it's that partnership again, like, with, it's important to, like, see that he works through people. So let's go back to Numbers 14. Let's keep going a little bit. So all the people want to stone them. Sounds about right? They're trying to stand on the faithfulness of the Lord and being like, no, we are capable of going into this amazing land that the Lord is trying to give us. So this is the second part of verse 10 in chapter 14. Then the glory of Adonai appeared at the tent of meeting to all Bnei Israel. And Adonai said to Moses, how long will these people treat me contemptibly? How long will they neglect to trust in me? In spite of all the miraculous signs I have performed among them, I will strike them with the plague. I will destroy them. But you, I will make into a nation greater and stronger than they. So I'm going to stop there before Moses' response, which is fantastic. But so this is an interesting thing with the Lord. And some people have, like, I want us to talk about this a little bit because this seems like he's being kind of fickle, right? He's like, well, these people aren't doing the right thing. We're going to start over again. What's the problem with that? Is that what he's really saying? Or what he really means?
No.
Okay.
Because even when he says, I'm still going to make you, like
Yeah.
Moses, I mean, he's not talking about wiping out everybody and starting with a new people group.
Right.
He's still staying with the same seed. He's still staying with the same group. Yeah, he's frustrated with this group, but he's still found faithful. It's kind of that remnant theory that I found my faithful, and I'm still going to keep my promise through that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so no, he isn't starting over with a whole new people group.
Right.
He's still staying with the same seed.
It's good. It's good.
That kind of seems similar to the Abraham and Isaac. Like, is he willing to sacrifice?
Yeah.
You know, all these people that he's been leading all this time. And how is he going to trust the Lord in it? So it seems kind of like a test, not necessarily him being like, yeah, I'm not going to fulfill my promises to these
Right.
people.
Yeah. That's good.
He likes to try our character.
Yeah. Because ultimately, right, the Lord, like, his heart is about our relationship with him, right? It's love. It's the first second commandment issue. It's love God, love neighbor, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole like yes, you're supposed to. So we have a problem with the allegiance to the Lord, right? In the greater number of people at this point, they're not really. Their relationship with him isn't strong enough that they're seeing that he's powerful enough to overcome this. But there are these few that are. And so then I think some of his concern with that is like, well, how do you regard your neighbor, right? How do you see the rest of the people around you? So their allegiance, right? Their relationship with the Lord is good, right? They're in the right place with the Lord. They're trusting that He's going to do what He says He can do. They see that they see that He's won. He has 100% win rate, right? Like, but they like, and so to me, then the question is like, are you going to let these other people, be sacrificed in some sense, I guess, just because they're not in the right place right now? Or are you going to fight for them too? I don't know. That's kind of how I see it, and sometimes maybe that breaks down somewhere. But it's kind of this whole, like, again, it's like, because I think part of, as the leader, Moses is this really unique leader, which is why we close the Torah, right, with like, until a prophet like Moses arises, but like Moses fulfills this really interesting role that no other prophet, priest, or king through the rest until Yeshua fulfills, or acts in the same way. They all would have kind of pieces of some of those roles, but Moses really he's just really unique. Anyway.
Unique in what way?
The way that he leads, no one else leads like him.
With humility?
With the kind of authority that he has. No one speaks to God quite the same way. No one carries, and I mean, yes, Aaron is technically the priest, but he's still receiving instruction from Moses. So really, like you look in scholarship, a lot of times they talked about these roles of prophet, priest, and king, and Moses actually, even though he doesn't necessarily formally have all those titles, he fulfills all of them. And the only other person to fulfill all of them is Yeshua, which is why there's this connection of a prophet like Moses.
You mean the fivefold?
No, I mean like the prophet, priest, and king. So you look through the rest of the Tanakh, you have prophets, you have priests, and you have kings. Sometimes there's overlap of two of those roles or more, but no one else does that. Even Joshua, Joshua is a very different leader than Moses. He does not lead, and he doesn't carry the same authority that Moses does. So Moses, there's just no other character in Scripture like Moses, and he's very much a precursor to Yeshua. And so, but Yeshua doesn't fulfill that role within Israel. All of those roles. I mean, no one until Yeshua, fulfills all of those roles within Israel. And so that's why they're always looking for this one who's like Moses, and they don't find him until Yeshua.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't understand, but that's interesting. I
Yeah.
didn't think about it that way.
Yeah. So yeah, we did. It was really interesting when I took it was a class on the Tanakh, so it was kind of an overview. But it's one of the things we looked at is like going through some of these major, looking at Moses and then looking at some of these other major leaders and seeing like that, David is a great king. He was not a prophet or a priest. We have great prophets. They were not priests. They were not kings. We have great, you see others who are great in these roles, but none of them carry all of them.
Yeah.
Neither did Moses.
No, but he operated in all of them. So he didn't carry the titles necessarily because there were no king. There were no kings.
He was obviously a prophet.
Yeah.
Obviously a priest. He functioned as one.
So there was no king, but he
functioned as
very
a
much
leader,
Right,
but not officially a king.
Right, because there's no one with that title, but he operates in that role.
Sure.
He's very much operating in the role, is what I'm saying. So they didn't formally have that title at the time, but he's very much functioning that way.
Well, God didn't want them to have that
Right,
title at that
right,
time.
yeah,
He said,
right.
I want to be your king.
Right, and that's why Moses was able to function, and that's the interesting paradox, right? Is Moses is able to function that way because he wanted the Lord to be king, to be an ultimate ruler. So that's why he could actually kind of fulfill that role, which is an interesting.
He was reluctant about the whole thing.
Exactly. I mean, So his humility definitely plays a role in that.
The most humble man in all of the earth.
Right. Which, depending on your view of how Torah became to be, it's like Moses might have written that about himself. Most people.
How was he humble? What made him so humble?
The meek. That's a whole study in itself, isn't it? Right? But the way I look at that, it's like Moses never wanted the job to begin with. I mean, he says at the burning bush, he says, "Who am I to do this?"
Yeah.
And all the time, the people are rebelling, and he's not. Oh yeah. He doesn't do that. He falls on his face before God, and then when God wants to wipe him out, he just intercedes for him. He's just exemplary in so many ways.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. I didn't understand the humility, so thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, and he also, I mean, he has some kind of speech issue, right? He knows that he like again, going back to how we see versus how the Lord sees. Like compared even just like compared to other people at the time, like he doesn't seem like the most qualified leader. Like, he's just in his humanity, he's just not, he's nothing extraordinary, which the Lord has a long history of choosing the unextraordinary, right?
Except
Like
he-
really going back with Abraham, there's no reason for him to have chosen Abraham other than Abraham said yes. Abraham agreed.
His faith.
Yeah.
Yes, entirely.
Except that Moses had the relationship with Pharaoh, being raised kind of like brothers. There was kind of like a good fit for that because he knew the comfort of going before him because he grew up with them and knew that.
Well, remember that's in the movies. that whole relationship is in the movies.
Oh, you don't think
we
that
don't. He was the son of Pharaoh's daughter.
you don't
So-
think they interacted?
Oh, they did, but we don't know to what extent.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that whole thing, whatever movie that was, the animated movie where they were
Oh yeah,
raised his
the
brothers,
Prince of
Charlton
something.
Heston, the Ten Commandments, where him and Yul Brynner, they raised his brothers like that. We don't really know.
Yeah,
for
because
sure.
it could have just been,
It could.
it was a favor to the daughter that he didn't kill, because he knew
Yeah.
he was a Hebrew boy, and
Yeah, yeah.
he would have wanted all of them
That
to
whole
be killed.
drama.
So yeah, we don't know.
You're not
what
the son of Egyptians. You're the son of Hebrew slave.
Mhm.
That
And he'd
probably-
also gone and been he'd run away for 40 years too. So again, people who run away typically aren't welcome. Well, depending on the circumstances, because he'd killed the Egyptian who had killed the Hebrew, right?
Right.
And so it's very likely when he came back that he wasn't. We don't know. There's a lot of the story that's not written for us, but it's similar to here. Like if these people go back to Egypt, they're not being welcomed back. They're being killed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so it's like after having run away for 40 years, it's likely that Moses was not going to be welcomed back.
Yeah.
So
We also don't totally know which pharaoh it was.
right,
So it could have been another pharaoh that he
It probably-
wasn't familiar with.
yeah, it probably was because of that length of time. So it probably was a different pharaoh. So yeah, so there's a lot of pieces at play here. But like we're saying, it's amazing, and it is showing this level of relationship I think that Moses has with the Lord, in that his response when the people are rebelling is to fall on his face. Now we do have stories at times when Moses does get angry, and that really actually doesn't usually go very well for him when he acts out of his anger before going to the Lord. But in this situation, he is, the Lord is angry. And so, but he's going back, and he has this relationship that I think he has learned. The way that he responds is so much of going back to the Lord with what the Lord has already told him and what he's experienced with the Lord before. That I think it's really, I don't know, it's just really powerful. So I'll read his.
And it seems to be about the Lord,
Right.
most of all.
I see this whole section here with this interaction between Moses and the Lord as just kind of an illustration of the relationship that they had. It's almost like the Lord was telling Moses even, because the Lord gets angry, he gets frustrated, but he's long-suffering toward his
Right.
people.
Right.
But then he also is fair and just, and he
Right.
even puts he listens to Moses's interceding for the people, but then he also, gives the people consequences too for their actions. So it seems to be this dialogue between the Lord and Moses, and you see the whole range of human emotion. We're created in God's image, and so it makes sense that God has some of these thoughts and feelings too as he's dealing with us.
Yeah,
So.
for sure. Which makes me even think back to kind of that same, just after that same portion in Leviticus 26 when it goes into the consequences. of being unfaithful.
Mhm.
And it goes in layers, right? I'm always amazed. Like, it goes in layers because, like, his goal is to bring them back to relationship. And so it's like, so if you do this is going to happen. But if you turn back, then we're good, basically. And I'm paraphrasing. I'm oversimplifying greatly. I realize that. But then it's like, but if you don't, then this is going to happen. You're going to eventually up to and including being cast out of the land, right? But then he's like, but when your hearts turn back, I will bring you back into the land, right? He's always looking for this restoration of relationship, but he is just, and he is like, there are consequences for your actions.
Yeah.
And his mercy is greater, right? Like, his grace is greater than that. Like, the slight, as soon as you turn back, it's not like you have to, like, necessarily, work for your reward or something. He does restore it. There has to be partnership with him in that. But my point is, like, it's always unto the restoration of relationship and bringing it back into that covenantal faithfulness and promises that he's laid out for them. So
I
yeah,
asked
let me
a lot of questions, but you're very good at teaching.
Let me read this response from Moses, and then we can keep talking about it, because this is good. So Moses said to Adonai, the Egyptians will hear about it, because you brought up this people by your power from among them. They will tell the residents of this land about it. Already they have heard that you, Adonai, are in the midst of this people, that you, Adonai, have been seen eye to eye, that your cloud remains over them, and that a pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night you go before them. If you kill these people all at once, the nations who have heard this report about you will say, because Adonai was unable to bring this people to the land he promised them, he has slaughtered them in the wilderness. So please let Adonai show his strength, just as you have spoken, saying, Adonai is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression. Still, he does not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations. Forgive now the guiltiness of this people in accordance with the greatness of your loving kindness, just as you have pardoned this people from Egypt until now. Like, that's a great response. Good job, Moses. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, man. But, like, really, what is he doing? He's repeating back to the Lord, like, this is what you've said. This is what you've done, and this is what you've said. And again, the Lord doesn't actually need to be reminded. He remembers all of that. But it's like, it's demonstrating this, like, this is, like, what happens when when we are aligned with him and his heart, that what happens is that we end up just repeating that back to him. Like, our hearts reflect back to him. And I think this is, I don't know, I love reading this passage, because I just think it's such a cool demonstration of that. And I think it's interesting that he brings up in this almost, it kind of looks like a negotiation. Like, we know, like, the Lord doesn't need to be negotiated with necessarily, but it's almost like this negotiation of, like, listen, these other nations have all heard about this, and if you do, strike down all these people and start a new line, even if it's through Moses, which is still the same seed, like Lori was saying earlier, like, all these other nations are going to know that you couldn't do it. That's what they're going to say, and that cannot be true. Right? Like, that is not how this works. And also, he's also setting up kind of what we see play out in the next section of, like, he doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. There are consequences for rebelling against the Lord, which ultimately we're going to see, and that's why, he's telling them they're going to be in the wilderness for 40 years, and everyone over the age of 20, except for Joshua and Caleb, are going to die before they enter the land. So there is consequence, but he doesn't remove the promise, and he doesn't start a new group of people, and he doesn't do all of those things, because he is the faithful one. So he's not replacing his people.
I wonder if, like, this conversation with the Lord, because it seems like Joshua and Caleb are part of this conversation, right?
Mhm.
Is what helped them stay not bitter towards the people while they were not going into the land,
Yeah.
when they were ready to conquer and take over and do it all, and yet, like, they were obedient to the Lord, but they were suffering the consequences of their own people
Right.
as well. So I'm wondering
Right.
if, like, part of this, like, remembering this conversation and then being like, oh, the Lord could have destroyed them, and it would have been just us,
Right.
right? But instead it was like, no, like, we are, like, they're our people, and
Yeah.
these are your people,
Yeah.
and this is who you are, Lord. This
Right.
is, it was like
Right.
a identity of
Yeah.
us, like, this is
Yeah.
who you called us to be,
Right.
and if we don't have that, then
Yeah, because
What
for
do you
Joshua and Caleb, like, it's always the like, wow, they're the righteous ones. They get to have this promise. But think of the amount of grief that they had to go through in the process too. They're watching everyone they know die. They know that they have to basically just wait for everyone to die.
And they had to roam around for 40 years.
Right. And it makes me wonder again, it's like, sometimes I'm like, I wish we had sometimes like, the different perspectives. It's almost like I wish we had like gospel style of this. Like I wish, how we have the 4 different gospels because we have different perspectives and different angles on it. Like I wish we had like, this is Moses's. I wish we had like Joshua's and Caleb's, and then maybe even someone else who was initially part of the rebellion and maybe their hearts turned later or something, but they still had to bear the consequences. And so, I'm like, I kind of wish we had some of the different angles because I think that would be so fascinating. But this is what we have, which is great. The Lord knew what he was doing. He knew what we could handle probably. And so this is what we have. But
Good point.
It could be that the Lord used those 40 years even in the hearts of Joshua and Caleb to prepare them.
Yeah, for sure.
For going to take the land.
Yeah. No, I think they probably definitely needed it, especially knowing that at this point, the people that are going, their army that they're going to have when they do go on the land is currently, child size. So that's a bit of an interesting thing. It's like, okay.
That is true.
And then it's also thinking, oh, we're going to be leading an army of like the children, like the sons of our friends. Like that's actually like the more like I let my mind like think through some of like the logistics of that, I'm like, that's actually really intense.
Wow.
So
That's intense.
it is really intense.
I like how you deep dive.
Yeah, it's just like, that's why I love reading the Torah every year, is it's like some of the like details you become more familiar with just like open up space, I feel like, in your mind to like think about some of these other things. And again, like a lot of this is speculation because we don't have it written, but still, it's like we understand humanity, right? Because we're humans. Yeah.
And to me, it's the wrestle that Moses had when he was talking to the Lord about the Lord's reputation. And I mean, like even on a personal matter, when somebody attacks God's character or his goodness, or God killed my child, or God did this, or God, and there's this relationship that's developed between Moses and the Lord that I don't want anybody. I love the Lord so much. I don't want anybody coming against his character or saying that he's not good, or he was too weak to defend his people, or so I think the focus, yes, it's the people, but in this dialogue here, you see Moses' deep concern for how the nations and how people view his God.
Yeah.
And I love that because I sometimes, I can get very offended when people view my God wrong.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you don't get him. This isn't, and so I can see that setup here, like the nations are going to view you wrong, Lord, and I don't want that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, which goes along with one of the things, and again, this is one of the things I like about Dennis Prager's commentaries, is he brings up this idea that one of the purposes and goals, I guess, of the Torah is to show that the God of Israel is different than the gods of all the other nations. And so I think that plays into how Moses is bringing up this argument here of just like, you cannot appear to be like the gods of the other nations who their people, when their people rebel, you give up on them or whatever. It's like you have to be this all-powerful, like, it's like, because it's who Moses knows him to be, but he's also saying it's like this, like the other nations know about you. And so it's like, you have to, it's not like, but it's not reputation management, but it's the truth. It's, it's like this whole, like, it's like, you have to be who you say you are, because that's part of, right? Like Israel's role as a light to the nations is that their God is not like the other gods, right? And so that has to continue to play out. And of course it does. So, okay, I'm gonna move us along a little bit because we have a couple minutes and I want to make a couple comments about chapter 15. So anyway, but we know, so just kind of wrap this section up. So we know the consequence ends up being, the Lord says, I forgive them. I'm going to bring you into the land. The other spies end up dying. So Joshua and Caleb are the only ones of the spies that are left, but then the rest of that generation will ultimately die in the wilderness before they go in. But of course, again, human nature is like, oh, now we really understand the consequences. Okay, so let's do it. So let's do what he originally said. And the Lord's like, no, that opportunity has expired. And, because he has to stay faithful to his word, right? He has to stay faithful to that. He has to stay faithful to the blessing and the consequence. It's like, it doesn't work if he's not faithful to both, right?
Yeah.
And so they try to go, they say, let's go take the land. He said we can do it. Now we believe it. After all this other stuff has happened, let's go try it. And he's like, and then Moses, and this is verse 41, why are you disobeying the mouth of Adonai? That will never succeed. You should not go up, because Adonai will not be among you, and you will be defeated before your enemies. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites are there in front of you, and you will fall by the sword. Adonai will not be with you, because you turned away from him. So the situation has clearly changed. Moses understands that, and he's trying to help them, and it doesn't go well for them, right? So then we have this really interesting pivot in the narrative. And this is another one of the things I think can be hard about Numbers, is that we kind of move around a little bit, because we were just in this really epic narrative, and now we have instruction about bringing fragrant offerings to the Lord. It's like, okay, I have mental whiplash. Thank you, Lord. But it's this. I was reading a little bit about this, and I wanted to. I wish I would have had a little bit more time to kind of dig into this idea a little bit more, because I found it really fascinating. But I was reading one. I don't remember which book I was reading at this point. I think it was the Torah story. But talking about how there's these little kind of drop-ins of some of the of instruction of the law, very similar to like Leviticus and things like that, kind of dropped in among the narratives, and it's seen as kind of a literary tool, I guess you could say, to kind of show some different sections in the narrative. But also, one of the things that it shows us when we kind of drop in some of these instructions is like it's part of their life. Like living the Torah and receiving the Torah is just kind of interwoven with their life, and so that's kind of what's going on in their normal life while all these other things are going on. So we don't really have time to dive into what's being talked about here, but I'll just make a couple comments. So it's like, so it's these, so what's interesting about this one is, so they've just, of course, gone through this whole thing. They've tried to go up. They can't, because, again, opportunity expired. And so chapter 15 starts with, again, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Bnei Israel and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you, where you will make your homes, and you are presenting a fire offering to Adonai, a burnt offering, or a sacrifice to mark fulfilling a vow, a freewill offering, or during a Boadim, to present a pleasing aroma to Adonai from the herd or from the flock, the one bringing the offering is to present a grain offering of a tenth of an ephah of fine flour mixed with a fourth of a hin of oil. So, but anyway, what sticks out to me in that is that immediately after all of this, and when you enter the land, you will do this. So, again, immediate opportunity has expired. Ultimately, he will still bring them in the land. And so he plays the long game, right? He has the bigger picture in mind. He will bring them in. It's delayed by 40 years at this point, but it's still important that he's preparing them to go in. So I think that's another reason, like, we start to see, like, it seems like there's been this rebellion, everything is really screwed up, and yet I'm this faithful God, and when you come in the land and we do this, this is how you're going to do it. Because ultimately that's where we're going. So I kind of appreciate, maybe it's because I love Leviticus and I feel like I'm returning back a little bit when we get to these sections, but I'm also like, no, it's the optimist maybe of like, we're still going to be in the land, and we're still going to be together in the land, and we're still going to live like what I told you in the land that I promised to you. And so I think that giving some of this in the midst of this is like a good reminder of that. It's like he still like has this ideal that he and the people are capable of doing that with him, even though they have just massively screwed up. Yeah.
Would you say though? I mean, he is still going to bring that judgment on
For
those
sure.
who brought the bad report. In
For
all
sure.
generation. So that promise is still kind of like what Lori said. It's to a portion of the seed. So it's like he will be faithful to his ultimate promises.
Right.
However, each individual
Right.
will suffer the consequences.
Right,
of their
right.
choices.
Yeah, because it's definitely, bringing this up does not negate the fact that he said that whole generation, he's just told them that whole generation is going to die. They're still going to die in the wilderness.
Right, those ones.
But so it's, again, it's that individual and the corporate. So it's like those individuals, they do have to live with the consequences of what they chose. And yet the Israel as a whole still has this promise, and he is going to fulfill that promise to Israel. So there's some really interesting things in here about these unintentional sins, but it's time for us to be done. Sorry, guys. We didn't get all the way to the end, but I knew we probably wouldn't. But I kind of just wanted to give some of that framework of because we're about to, next week's portion, we head into yet another rebellion, right? And so it's almost like we drop in these little and when everything is going well, this is what's going to happen. And then you're going to rebel again. But we can always come back. He always provides a way back. It's what's hard about Numbers, though. It's what's hard is to go in these constant cycles of this rebellion and instruction. It's hard. I kind of want to live in the ideal, but that's not how life works.
Yeah.
Because we're convinced. But anyway, so Lord, we thank you again for your Torah. We thank you for this instruction that you've given us. That you've made it so that we can relate, we can understand. We understand the humanity of these people, Lord, but we also see your power and your righteousness and your glory, Lord. We thank you that we get to gather together and discuss these passages and learn from them and learn from the people who've gone before us, Lord. And we just ask that you would continue to refine us so that we can be in line with your heart, Lord. That we can be showing your character in the world right now as we're living, Lord. So we just ask that you continue to bring conviction in places where we're not seeing things like you see them, Lord, and help us to come more in line with how you are seeing the world, Lord. We ask for your presence to continue to be with us in service, Lord. We thank you so much for Shabbat, for this opportunity to gather and worship you together and just enjoy your presence and a day of rest, Lord. So be with each person as they are, that is part of the service. And we just ask for more of your presence among us, Lord. B'Shem Yeshua.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.